Hello.
Dello Stritto, talking about movies.
Hey, Frank. Do you know what movie it is tomorrow?
Tomorrow it is the Battleship Potemkin, 1925 silent classic from Russia.
Did we talk about it before?
We've never talked about it with me.
All right.
Okay, 1925. One of the miracles of the 1920s is the resurgence of Soviet cinema. Nobody would have guessed it. The Russian Revolution was 1917. Pretty bad period for everybody, post-World War I, and out of nowhere, two countries that have really gone through hell, Germany and Russia, become two most interesting places in the world for what's going on in the world in terms of cinema. And there's a young genius at work in Russia named Sergei Eisenstein, who's 27 years when this movie comes out. And like a lot of, I made a list. There's a lot of filmmakers whose movies kind of caught the attention of the world. They were so dynamic and revolutionary, and they were young men. Orson Welles was 26 when Citizen Kane came out. Francis Ford Coppola was 33 when The Godfather came out. Quentin Tarantino was 29 when Reservoir Dogs came out. Ed Wood was 29 when Glenn McGlenda came out.
Oh, well.
That's a joke.
I knew that.
27 when Battleship Potemkin comes out. And this was this really rocked the cinematic world. I mean, many filmmakers in Hollywood considered this their favorite movie at the time. And for a long time, the Brussels World Fair voted it the greatest movie ever made. I checked the latest list of greatest movies ever made, and it's fallen out of fashion. It's on one or two people's lists, but when they poll directors and people who get the vote of these things, Battleship Potemkin isn't there anymore. So I guess the sun has set on its ranking as one of the greatest films ever made. But it's certainly one of the most influential films ever made. And the Steps of Odessa scene, when the movie is about a mutiny in Russia in 1905 which failed obviously because the real revolution didn't come until 12 years later. But 1905 there was a lot of political unrest in Russia, a mutiny on the Battleship Potemkin, and when the ship docks, they unite with revolutionaries on shore, and there's a confrontation with the government troops on the steps of Odessa. And you can guess who's better armed, so it turns into a massacre. But that was one of the most famous sequences in the history of the cinema, and it really rocked people. And Woody Allen has a scene one of his movies. I forget which one. I think it was Bananas, which is borrowed from that, pays homage to it. So this was really an influential film. This is one of the films, you like it or not, whether it creaks a little with age or not. This is a film everybody should see if they're serious about knowing anything about the history of the movies, because it is really something. It probably holds the record for the most musical scores written for a silent movie. For a while there, it seemed every year there was a new score coming out, and I have no idea what print you're showing, and I hope there's a musical score attached to it, but there's quite a variety. You can collect DVDs with different scores for Battleship Potemkin, and there were scenes, depending on where it played, there were scenes taken out. Either they were too violent or too insurrectionist. Length tends to vary. Anything 75 minutes or over has the guts in there. There might be, I think the longest version I know of is like 77 minutes, but 75 minutes or more, and you've got it. I don't know how long your version is. It was the movie played in the United States, did okay. It was banned in the UK as being too radical, and I was surprised when I was preparing for the show. I was surprised that there were periods when it was even banned in Russia, but Russia under Stalin, there was some paranoids at work there, and it fell in and out of favor, as did Eisenstein himself. Eisenstein was no matter where he lived, he would have bucked the system, so he certainly bucked the system in Russia, and that got him in the hot water sometimes, and he'd be in the doghouse, and then he'd be back in favor.
Kind of like Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, kind of like Lugosi. Because Eisenstein died a very young man. I think he had just turned 50 when he died of a heart attack, and so he doesn't have a lot of feature films to his credit, because he'd be in and out of favor. So that means he had budgets or he didn't. He'd be relegated to teaching positions, and then when they needed him, they thought they had something that he could serve them well in, they'd give him a project. if anybody wants to get into an interesting history, they should read up on Eisenstein in Hollywood. He actually, as a result of his movies in the mid-20s, Battleship Potemkin was the most famous. Personally, I think Strike, his first feature film, is a better film. I think it succeeds all over the place. And his famous movie on the Russian Revolution, October, also known as 10 Days Shook the World. These made him world famous, and he became something of a showpiece for Russia. So they let him travel. He went to Europe and lectured here, and then he wound up in Hollywood. And he worked for Paramount Studios, and that didn't last long. And then he got jobs here and there, and he got projects here and there. But he was never very good at finishing them, and he went off to Mexico and filmed miles of film. I think 170 feet of film. I've read up to 250,000 feet of film, which, and when you get that much film, it takes a lot of editing to get that down to a manageable film. And some shorter films that come out of it, but he never really completed the project. He had this massive thing in mind for a 6-part series on Mexico, which he had to surrender the film, and it was cut up here and there, but not by him. So he was a bit bitter about that.
Well,
your
tomorrow
viewers are in for a treat, I think. If I had anything downside to say about this movie, is it concentrates on events, but it doesn't concentrate on people. You know, you had the Civil War, but you remember Scarlett O'Hara.
And that's our show.
Okay,
9
and I
p.m.
hope you remember me. Joe, I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks. 9 p.m. tomorrow night, people.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Frank Dello Stritto, and the views and opinions on Visual Radio are those of our guests, not necessarily those of this TV station, WinCam, or other surrounding stations in New York, Massachusetts. Good night, people. Thank you.